Hi, I'm Jenny Champeau. I'm the director of the Book of Mormon Art Catalog, and I'm here today with Devin Jensen. Devin is the executive editor of the BYU Religious Studies Center, and he also regularly publishes and presents on church history topics. He recently co-edited the book Battlefields to Temple Grounds, Latter-day Saints in Guam and Micronesia. Today, we're looking at some of the very earliest chapters in the Book of Mormon, 1st Nephi 1 through 5, and the piece we're looking at is by C.C.A. Christensen, and it shows Lehi's family leaving Jerusalem. Last week, we introduced you to this whole panorama with 11 panels on it, and today we're just looking at this one panel to dive in a little deeper. We call it the untitled Dimmick Huntington panorama. So Devin, can you tell us who was Dimmick Huntington and how was he connected with C.C.A. Christensen?
Certainly. Dimmick Huntington was an early convert to the church and was a drum major in the Nauvoo Legion, was very involved. He was one of the people arrested for the destruction of the printing press. He was very involved with Joseph Smith. When they came west, he basically was an interpreter for the Shoshone and Ute and Paiute languages.
Okay.
He, in fact, he created an early dictionary, 1853 dictionary. That's one of the earliest dictionaries we have of these Numic languages.
Okay.
And so he was really interested in teaching the gospel to the indigenous peoples of Utah. And so he said, I want to create a panorama or kind of a teaching scroll that would be useful to teach the various groups and to orient them to these concepts, the Book of Mormon story, but he wasn't a painter, so he asked C.C.A. Christensen to do this. C.C.A. was an early, he did painting of mostly theater props and backgrounds, and among other things, and he had studied at the Danish Academy of Arts, and so he had this interesting background that very few other immigrant Latter-day Saints had. And so he agreed to do this. And so this scene, Lehi's family leaving Jerusalem, is really an interesting scene because you have the walls of Jerusalem in the background. You have this symbolic portrayal of them entering the wilderness. And so there's an immediate transition there. But then you have these interesting choices. Look at the costumes, for example. You have these kind of interesting leggings. You have these robes. You have the fringe on Lehi's upper portion of his sleeve there. And then you have these interesting moccasin-looking things. And you have the knapsacks. They're carrying their possessions with them. We know from the Book of Mormon that they left their home, their what is it? What else does it say? It says their silver and gold.
Their land.
Yes, their land, and they took with them, and it names them by Sariah and Laman and Lemuel and Sam and Nephi. And so these are the individuals shown here. My wife said, as we were looking at this, Sariah is turning away from us. Is she expecting?
Interesting.
Yeah, because we know that Jacob was born in the wilderness. We know that daughters were born at some point during the journey. They're mentioned in the New World for the first time. So we're basically getting an orientation to this family that's going to be very important. Now, why is this even painted? This connects with the Dimmick Huntington question.
Okay.
This is to help them understand the origins of the indigenous people, and so to help them understand this. To link the Bible story with the Book of Mormon story and to connect the story that's happening in Jerusalem with the story in the Americas.
Okay.
So it's all orienting. I think it's also interesting that we have a bow and arrow. We know that's mentioned in the Book of Mormon text, but that would have been resonant with the indigenous tribes here in Utah. We have a dagger suggesting maybe a foreshadowing of the sword of Laban that they're going to later acquire.
Right.
So anyway, some interesting symbolic things. Of course, the dog. The dog. The dog is interesting. Yeah. So we had to look at this up. I was looking at it. It looks like domesticated pets, such as sheepdogs, were about that right era. That may have been a little bit early for them, but they are mentioned in Isaiah and others, so that's very possible that Lehi's family could have had a dog.
Oh, that's really interesting. I just feel like it makes it so relatable to see this family, even with their family dog, and headed out with so few possessions. I know in the scriptures that Nephi takes care to list. Right? He says we take our tents and our provisions and our family, and that's it. And off they go. On the costuming, I just think it's such a fascinating conglomeration of maybe some New World elements like the fringe or the moccasins, but then also CCA is clearly drawing on these Old World elements too, of like the shoe. I mean, Nephi's shoes in particular almost look like a Louis XIV kind of a thing. And then these kind of Roman, maybe pleated togas or skirts and robes. And it's just a really fascinating mix that I feel like CCA, drawing on what he knows, having lived in Europe and now living in this new frontier in America, in Utah, is trying to show something exotic, right, with the visual vocabulary that he has. Why is it that this piece isn't as familiar to us today?
Oh, great question. So this particular panorama was passed down from Dimmick Huntington's family to George Washington Hill. George Hill was also a missionary along with Dimmick Huntington, and was very involved with the conversion of the Shoshone people. And so he was the natural heir and successor to Dimmick Huntington. Well, that passed from person to person down their line for many generations. And then in the 2000s, I'm not sure the exact year, Marlon K. Jensen, our church historian and recorder, was approached by somebody, a classmate at a 50th high school reunion, and said, "We have in our family a CCA Christensen panorama. Would you like to see this?"
Wow.
And so he said, "Oh, I'd be delighted." And so they began to look at this panorama and look at the scenes and analyze the provenance, where'd this come from. And so about the time, just after they acquired this, Steve Olson at the Church History Museum said, "I'm really interested in knowing more about this story. We've compiled some things. Would you like to write about this?" And so I worked with Laura Hurtado, and we fleshed this out for Pioneer magazine and said, "This is what we know about the panorama." It was very interesting to study it because it is still being housed at the Church History Museum and is not on display anywhere.
Right.
And so this is a scene that fortunately you have portrayed in your catalog, and because of this, lots of people can appreciate this.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, Devin, you were the person who actually first introduced me to these images after you had found them and done this great research on them, and that Pioneer magazine issue is terrific. Loved all the work you did on that. And I just think it's wonderful to recover our very earliest Latter-day Saint engagements with the Book of Mormon in the art, right? This is really one of the first times that someone is looking at the Book of Mormon and thinking, how do I put this in art, right? And make, like you said, make it something that a variety of people could see and understand.
In fact, CCA Christensen is probably our most prolific 19th century Latter-day Saint artist who's portraying these religious themes. Because of him, we have these early depictions. And yes, you see some European influence in there, but we have something that is a treasure. And think about all the European masters who put their own culture in the time of Christ.
Right.
It's a similar sort of put myself in the painting and try to make sense of the world around me.
Do you feel like, does this portrayal of the scene make you think any differently about the idea of this family going out from Jerusalem?
I definitely think that the lightness of the provisions makes me feel very vulnerable at how vulnerable their situation was. I think about the family dynamics. I think about Sariah, how's she traveling? How is she expecting? I think about the very harsh environment they are about to enter and the difficulty they're going to experience over the next few weeks and months, and then I think about us traveling across the sea.
Right.
We, one interesting thing about this, and we were thinking about this earlier, is this is a bridge scene. You have this scene of them in Jerusalem, but the scene just before it is Noah's flood.
Right.
And so you have the water scene there, and then the scene that comes right after this is Nephi being tied to the mast of the ship as they're going. And so you see this voyage, and you see the water, and you see that maybe connecting the dots between the old world and the new world.
That's really interesting. Now, CCA actually did, this one is from 1871 to 1875, somewhere in there. And then in 1890, he did another series of Book of Mormon paintings, and he did the same scene, but it's a little bit different. What do you see as the big differences here?
So I love this because this shows his development as an artist. The other one is more of a basic portrayal, but I like the depth you see. You see Jerusalem far in the background, just hinted at, and then you see the camels suggesting more, a more complex portrayal of the voyage. You see interesting. I don't know what that saddle sort of arrangement is.
I know, but I was wondering that too.
But it's interesting. You've got a child in there in this one as opposed to the other one, suggesting maybe Jacob or maybe a daughter. And then you've got Nephi kind of pointing the way. You've got also his bow there. He's got the blue and yellow, suggesting in that, as you said, in the series, that's how he's portrayed. And then you've got probably Lehi over here. Now, these clothes look a little bit more refined, and maybe he's had some time to think about what the Middle Eastern clothes would have looked like. So it looks like maybe he thought this through a little more. Those are some things. And of course, the foliage is a lot more developed.
Yes,
in the previous one, it's just kind of, okay, here's a tree, here's a tree.
Right.
Now you've got a little bit of a forest happening.
Yeah. This sort of covering that Sariah and who is this? Maybe Jacob in there. It almost reminds me of like a Conestoga wagon kind of a situation, and maybe CCA is thinking about that and drawing parallels between the journey that his own people had across the American wilderness to get to the Promised Land too.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because he did immigrate across the U.S. and was a handcart pioneer in 1857, and so he is a great portrayer of that journey across the wilderness, and so it probably would have resonated with him to think of Lehi's family traveling across a great wilderness and making his way to a promised land, which is essentially what CCA did as well, and his family.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
I am so grateful that we have these early portrayals. These are among the earliest Book of Mormon portrayals that we have, and because of these, we have a little bit of a keepsake that would otherwise be lost to us. They help us envision how the people of that time were trying to understand the voyage from the old world and trying to connect the dots with the indigenous people of Utah in a way that they could understand the baptismal covenant they were preparing to make.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And thanks for joining us today.
Of course, you're welcome.
Okay.